It's possible to focus on the breath and not learn much of anything. One of John Lee's friends, who was also a student of Ajahn Mun, complained to him one time, "Why do you teach people to focus on the breath? All there is in and out, in and out." And as John Lee said, well, if that's all you can see, that's all there is. The implication being that the problem is not with the breath, it's with the way you look at it. Buddha says that one of the qualities you want to look at in yourself as a meditator is your ingenuity. He doesn't explain it much. It's one of those terms that's very rarely mentioned in the canon, but then it becomes an important thing to know about, which means that you have to be ingenious in how you interpret that. I was staying with Ajahn Fuang. The two things he said you have to develop most in your meditation are, one, your powers of observation, and two, your ingenuity. You have a clear idea of what you want here. You want to get the mind to settle down with a sense of well-being. But then you run into obstacles, and some of the obstacles are things you didn't expect. Look at the Buddha's instructions on breath meditation. And they're just 16 steps. It's not much to go on. You have to fill in the blanks. We're practicing mindfulness of breathing to get the mind into concentration. That much is clear. And the 16 steps fall into 4 tetrads. One tetrad deals with the body, one with feelings, one with the mind, and one with dhammas. In other words, they deal with the frames of reference that we use to establish mindfulness. But the question is, do you follow them 1 through 16? The way the Buddha describes how they lead to mindfulness practice, or embody mindfulness practice, suggests that you could focus on any one tetrad. Like the first one. You discern when the breath is long, you discern when the breath is short. You breathe in and out, sensitive to the entire body. You breathe in and out, calming bodily fabrication. The word bodily fabrication there means basically the in and out breath. The question, of course, is why would the Buddha use a technical term there? And the answer is he wants you to think in terms of fabrication. He's trying to direct your ingenuity. To what extent is the breath a fabricated process? A fabrication here means that you're working with intention. To what extent is the breath intentional? It is one of the processes of the body that can either be automatic or intentional. The question is how much of the automatic side of it really is automatic, and how much of it has become subconscious in the way you direct it. And one way to learn about that is to try to adjust the breath. Find a way of breathing that feels good. The Buddha himself suggests this in one of his analogies. You're a cook, and you're working for a king or a king's minister, people who are not easy to please. And so you prepare all different kinds of dishes and see what the king or the king's minister likes. Now the king may say that he likes this or likes that, but he may not say anything, in which case you have to look, well, where does he reach for? What does he take more of? Then you provide more of that. When you do it, you satisfy the king, then you're going to get a reward. In the same way as a meditator, you want to find something that the mind likes, which means you have to experiment. You can try long breathing, short breathing, fast, slow. See what the body likes. Ajahn Lee uses his ingenuity, shows his ingenuity by expanding on the analogy. So not only have to please the king, but you also have to change what you make, because it's not the case that the king is going to want the same thing day in and day out. So there are days when long breathing feels good, and other days when it's not so interesting anymore. Well, you have to change, vary your offerings. That's when you get a reward. When the breath feels good, what do you do with it? There's another sutra where the Buddha says that you take whatever sense of ease or well-being that comes as the mind begins to settle down, and you work it through the body, the same way that a bathman would work water through a ball of bath powder. Back in those days they didn't have soap. They had a kind of powder that you would make into a dough by the way you mixed it with water. So how do you do that? How do you work the ease through the body? How do you knead the ease through the body? Well, John Lee talks about the breath energies in different parts of the body that flow along the nerves, flow along the blood vessels. When you think of that property of the wind element, and the in-out breath is also property of the wind element, you work the two of them together. There's nothing in the canon that says to do this, but it's a solution to the problem posed by the fact that the Buddha doesn't explain everything. So what way of working with the energies in the body will work for you? How do you perceive the energies in your body? A common problem is that when the mind begins to settle down, there's a feeling like a band of tension around the head, or centered between the eyes. And often it seems pretty resistant to any way of breathing around it, or breathing through it. The question is, how do you perceive it as you breathe through it? Do you think that it's got a surface that you've got to push? And when you're breathing through, where you're breathing from and where you're breathing to? Maybe that's aggravating the tension. I've personally found that if it's good to imagine that band of tension not as a band, but just as kind of a cloud. And with all clouds, there's no clear surface. And there's a lot of space between the water droplets. And let that space do the breathing. In other words, you don't let the tension do the breathing, you let the space inside the tension do the breathing. And you're breathing into the tension from all directions. It changes the way you feel that tension in the head. It becomes more of just a heaviness. And you think about the fact that when you're sitting here and the mind gets calm, the areas of the head that tend to get tensed back and forth, tensed and released as you think, suddenly now released entirely. And so, of course, the blood is going to flow into those areas. If you push the blood around, of course, you're going to get headaches. So don't think of blood, don't think of surfaces, don't think of bands. You can think of a knife cutting through the bands. So all just little pieces. And each little piece is breathing in, breathing out. It's breathing for its own sake. You're not trying to push the breath through to get to someplace else. What does that do? In other words, you play with your perceptions. That's how ingenuity works. First you've got to alert yourself to what your perceptions are, and then you challenge them. And then think of alternatives. One of the easiest ways to think of alternatives, of course, is to ask yourself the opposite. If the breath is going in, and it seems to be going in one direction, what is it? What if it's actually going in another direction? Or if you can just think of it going in another direction, what happens? Learn to play with things like this. And you see the extent to which your perceptions actually shape what you experience, and how they don't have to be written in stone. They can be changed. Because that's what the Buddha's teachings all come down to, is the fact that you can change things. If you couldn't change things right now, he said the path to the end of suffering would be impossible. But the fact that things are not totally shaped by the past gives you some leeway right now to make a difference. So play with that. Ask questions that you didn't ask before. Try on some perceptions that you didn't use before. We borrow the perceptions we get from the Buddha, from the Ajahns. And if they don't work for us, we don't say that they were bad, simply that they were not quite the solution to the problem that we have. This is one of the reasons why the Buddha's instructions on breath meditation are so sketchy. We have to learn how to fill in the blanks. And the way you fill in the blanks and the way somebody else fills in the blanks may not get the same results, even if you do the same things. So you have to make adjustments. You have to fill in. So just as John Lee recommended ingenuity and also showed ingenuity in how he played with the Buddhist teachings, you should learn to show some ingenuity to yourself. Surprise yourself with the questions you ask. You may get some surprisingly useful answers. After all, if the insight were something you could anticipate, it would be something you could read in a book, and that would be the end of the problem. But the insight that's going to work for one person may not have the same effect for another person. Because where you've created your own problems in the way you create suffering, again, the Buddha talks in large terms. You have to get down to the specifics if you really want his teachings to work. Which means that the Buddha doesn't do all the lifting for you. You have to do the lifting yourself. I had a student one time who wanted to have the path laid out for him ahead of time and just be told what to do, and so he could follow instructions and do it. And he got frustrated when I told him, well, try this, try that, see what works. After his 5th year here, he went to Thailand. He found out that that's how the Ajahns over there taught as well. There's no one insight technique that's going to work for everybody. No one penetrating question that's going to penetrate your particular defilements, your particular misunderstandings. You've created your misunderstandings, and now you're going to have to use your ingenuity to take them apart. There are certain general principles that work, but a lot of it lies in the details, the specifics. That's where you have to use your ingenuity. That's where you have to play.